This is what my arm looks like. 3 Zelda tattoos, see? This is what my room looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Zelda posters. Therefore, I am considered a mega fan. Actually, 7 posters now. And I have this amazing drawing of Fierce Deity Link. I even got the ocarina. Now that you know how much I love Zelda, let me just take a big ol' poop on Tears of the Kingdom real quick. I'm gonna say it. Tears of the Kingdom was disappointing, and the closest thing that I can equate to how I feel about it is post-nut clarity. Also, spoiler alert for Tears of the Kingdom story. The way that I look at Tears of the Kingdom is that basically Nintendo looked at Breath of the Wild, they saw the complaints that people had with it, and they were like, alright, let's give this another try. That's the idea I get from Tears. It just feels like a retry of Breath of the Wild, and if that's what they were going for, I would say that they succeeded. However, since it's a direct sequel, I think it fell flat in a lot of ways. But it's weird because on one hand, I would say that Tears of the Kingdom is a better game than Breath of the Wild. It has better story, the abilities are way more fun and versatile, it has better dungeons for the most part, and it fixes a lot of minor issues that Breath of the Wild had. But on the other hand, I think that because this is the direct follow-up to Breath of the Wild, the game that reinvented the Zelda formula, innovated a lot, and brought it to a bigger scale, I guess Tears of the Kingdom just didn't have that same wow factor for me. I mean, I was still wowed, I just wasn't wowed, you know? I just couldn't shake the thought of, man, it just feels like I'm playing a better Breath of the Wild. And while I was okay with that feeling at first, as I got further into Tears of the Kingdom and beat it, and now I'm looking back on it, it didn't leave that same long-lasting impression that Breath of the Wild did. So basically, if Breath of the Wild weren't to have come out and it was just Tears of the Kingdom, I would probably have gotten on my knees and gagged on this game and begged for it to let me breathe every so often. But because it's a sequel that I waited 6 years for, and prior to it coming out, I was misled into thinking it would be darker than Majora's Mask, and they decided to stick with a flawed formula, and by the end of it, it didn't really feel like the story was pushed forward or evolved that much. That's why I'm complaining. I hate the story structure of the last 2 Zelda games. You walk around the map, find little fragment thingies, see a cutscene. I hate this a lot. This is one of the aspects of the game that makes me think it's too focused on the freedom of exploring and doing things your own way, because I don't want to see those story cutscenes out of order, which is what happened to me. But on the flip side of that, it's not extremely essential that you see them in order, which I think is a problem in itself. If I can watch scenes from a movie in any order, it feels more like a collection of short snippets rather than a cohesive film or story. I found out very early on into the game that Zelda turns into a dragon, and I think it's just because they made it way too obvious. And that's not the only thing that's obvious. You piece together very quickly that the Zelda that you're seeing in your time is not the real Zelda, and then you see a cutscene that confirms that, and even though Link is able to communicate with people, he just doesn't tell the sages or anyone that the Zelda is a fake. And man, I don't know, there's just a lot of nitpicky little problems like that that really ruin my Zelda immersion. And not to mention that every sage has the exact same cutscene when you do their quest. This is just lazy, and it makes it harder for me to care about the character's story. Now, I don't dislike that Zelda turned into a dragon and has been flying around for years and years waiting for you to save her. I think that was really cool, actually. And I wouldn't dislike the cutscenes of the past if it felt like there were still things happening in the present time. I want the story to be kind of in my face sometimes, and I probably wouldn't have had as much of an issue with it if it wasn't basically the same exact story structure from Breath of the Wild. Almost everything bad that happens has already happened. I don't feel constantly threatened or pressured to save the world, and especially with one of the coolest iterations we've ever had of Ganondorf, that boy needs some more screen time. And I'm not talking about cutscenes of the past. I want to see current day stuff from him happening. Have him get fully healed and revived and recovered during the story and start wreaking havoc around Hyrule instead of just waiting underground for me the whole time so I can find him and just beat him off and make him finish before shit really hits the fan. But yeah, you've got this supposedly extra powerful version of Ganon compared to Calamity Ganon, but the threat that he presents to the world feels pretty much the same minus some new enemies. And I might actually argue that he felt more threatening in Breath of the Wild since I could constantly see him flying above Hyrule Castle. But really, this Ganondorf, he was just a bitch. I think Tears of the Kingdom's story was about half as long as it should have been. The first half of the game should have been what it is now, minus the final boss, of course, and the second half should have been Ganondorf being fully recovered and making appearances around different spots in the world, terrorizing villages. There could have been a segment where he leads an assault against Lookout Landing and leaves the place in ruins. There was just so much potential to really make me fear Ganondorf and see him as an actual active threat, but instead he wanted to just sit in his cave and play with that big old green weenie. I also just wish that Ganondorf had more character development overall. Like, I understand that he's a reincarnation of pure evil, which on paper doesn't have much character other than being pure evil. So I'm not saying he needs some sort of Thanos motivation or anything like that, but he really could be one of Zelda's most interesting characters if they just showed him doing more evil things. We got to see a little bit of deception in one of the cutscenes, or an attempt at it, but he really didn't have enough presence in the story for me to even think about him that much. And seeing as he's had so many different appearances in Zelda games, I want to say it's safe to assume that this will be the last one we see of him for a while. So Nintendo had a chance to send him off really well, and they kinda did, but they really didn't at the same time. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he will be in the next game. Maybe we get to see the Ultra Instinct Demon King Ganondorf. I don't know. I also didn't hate that Ganondorf turned into a dragon at the end for cinematic purposes. It looked cool, but it was one of those, you know, playable cinematic moments, which makes me wish we had another phase for his boss fight somehow. For someone called the Demon King, he definitely looked sick, but didn't feel as powerful as he should have. I acknowledge that these newer Zelda games are more gameplay focused rather than story focused. I just wish Nintendo were willing to experiment more with it. Alright, next up, probably the most disappointing thing for me in this game, at least gameplay wise, is the feeling of progression and meaningful quests. You didn't like weapon durability in Breath of the Wild? You thought the weapons broke too fast? Well, we fixed that now. You can attach monster parts to your weapons to make them last longer. Cool, thank you Nintendo, but now there's another problem. I kill monsters to get their monster parts to make my weapons last longer, and then what? Well, you kill more monsters. Oh, that's it? Fusing monster parts to your weapons is a great addition to the game. I'm not trying to downplay that. However, to me, it ended up feeling pointless to fight monsters. I kill the high tier ones to get their good parts so that way I can fight the bigger bosses like the Gleeoks and the Lionels. But what's the reward for killing those? More monster parts. You fight your way to the top of the food chain not for any permanent upgrades or meaningful abilities. You just get another monster part that's going to break after however many uses. Oh, and you can use monster parts to upgrade your armor, but what are you going to do with that? You're going to fight more monsters to get more monster parts. I am not a fan of this loop. Some of the cosmetics are locked behind fighting monsters, which is good on paper, but most of the cosmetics are ones that you already had in Breath of the Wild, so I'm just going back through for the stuff that I'd already previously earned rather than saving up my powerful monster parts to fight actually difficult enemies and give me new cosmetics or upgrades. And then you've got the quests, which probably, like, I don't know, 85% of them felt meaningless. I'm okay with having a bunch of trash quests, like quests that are just there for padding and just to make the game have more content, but some of the quests that were supposed to be meaningful were very disappointing. For example, the one in Gerudo Town, where you gotta find the balls and rub them and treat them really well and put them in the hands of the statues, and then you go underground in the lost Gerudo tomb or whatever it is. And then there's a bunch of basic ass items in there. You did this quest that could potentially take you a couple hours and you're rewarded with trash. Probably the most fulfilling side quest to me was the one in Terrytown when you unlock your custom home, which if you saw my Yelp review of Hudson Construction, you might think that I don't like that feature, which is not true. I really did enjoy building my home, but I just wish there were more options. That's an example of a good side quest. Kinda. I mean, the quest itself was okay, but the reward was satisfying enough. Another quest that I'd like to point out was the Yiga one, where you unlock that little tornado thing. Stuff like that is what I want to see more of. The ability itself is whatever, but it's a quest that could actually feel worth doing because it adds more to my arsenal. I'm getting rewarded with a permanent upgrade rather than rupees or food that I don't need. And the game still had plenty more good side quests, but a large majority of them were shallow, pointless, and even some of the good ones felt a little lackluster in the end. And next, I'm going to categorize the depths, the sky islands, and the caves all together because they all have the same issue. They're all shallow, repetitive, and left me wishing that there was more care and unique things put into them. The depths were exciting at first until you realize that it's mostly empty space, and the points of interest were just repeated Yiga strongholds, coliseums, and mines that became uninteresting after the first one you discover. There weren't many sky islands, but most of them were basically the same, and the unique ones were interesting until you complete them and you're left wanting more, and again, basically all the caves were just the same thing. And the rewards you get from the bubble frogs didn't feel rewarding enough. I don't want to compare this game to Elden Ring, but you know what? I'm gonna do it. You can't stop me. Because, I mean, it really does act as a benchmark of how open world games should be done, in my opinion. And if Tears of the Kingdom took a page out of Elden Ring's book and included more optional dungeons and areas with well thought out level designs spread throughout the world with more interesting, unique, and fleshed out characters and more meaningful progression systems, Tears could have potentially passed up Elden Ring, but in my eyes, Elden Ring is still the best open world game I've ever played. There was not a single cave in Elden Ring that I didn't want to explore because there were so many meaningful upgrades for me to get, but in Tears of the Kingdom, after doing like the 5th one, I already had the idea that most of them would be useless to me. We also need more variety with optional or hidden bosses. Like, it was cool to fight Master Koga, but there's so much room for more bosses, especially with the new gameplay mechanics. Maybe my standards are too high, maybe I was a little spoiled by Elden Ring, but I guess I expected more from 6 years of development when the world was mostly already made. So yeah, that was a lot of complaining, and to be honest, I could probably find some more things to complain about, but those were my biggest issues with the game. And I'd like to reiterate that I still loved Tears of the Kingdom, I still had a lot of fun playing it, but now that the honeymoon phase is over, our relationship just isn't in the best place, and we might even be looking at a divorce if they don't come out with a good DLC. And again, I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree with me, so feel free to just absolutely shit on me in the comments, but do it respectfully, because I'm a duck, and ducks are people too. Thanks for watching, see you later!